All right, you heard it there. The Prime Minister conceding that it was a poor choice of words to respond to that reporter over the weekend, saying, who cares about when he and Donald Trump last spoke? We've got our front bench on tap, some of whom are having some issues getting into the link, so we're going to start with two of them. Kathleen Monk is former Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates, and Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. And then hopefully Dan Moulton and Laura Stone will be joining us as soon as it is technically feasible. Kathleen, I'll start with you on this one. It's been a while since we heard, it's normally Doug Ford who's coming forward with the mea culpas. It's been a while since I've heard anyone on the federal scene in Parliament Hill do that. What do you think in this instance prompted the Prime Minister to feel it was a big enough deal to apologize for?
Yeah, I think first off, you have to kind of back up and think, was it a mistake in the first place for Carney to say, who cares? Because if you talk to my friends and folks at the grocery store and you ask them like, hey, what's the latest with Trump? I think a lot of Canadians would say, who cares? We're done with that guy. But what Carney forgot is that as a politician, it's important for him to both act and emote. And that's what he failed to do. He failed to kind of remember that there's a lot of people with jobs on the line across this country that are waiting for him to figure out a deal with the U.S. And I think that kind of, it really shows some of his kind of, business CEO kind of credentials. Like he doesn't have time for that kind of emotional communication. And he's just trying to show through the deals he's making internationally that he's actually working on the issue. I think it was right. I give him credit. He kind of pulled a Doug Ford, as you just said, Vashi. He came out, he apologized right away, said it was a poor choice of words. I also want to give him a little bit of a break because, like your colleague Rachel Ayala was saying earlier on the show, he has just been flying around the world. And if you see me without a good night's sleep or a good cup of coffee, I'm prone to be pretty blunt in my statements too. Traveling for the United Arab Emirates and obviously South Africa, those are long haul flights, probably pretty exhaustion. I'm not one to normally give him a lot of credit, but I do think on this one, I often think to myself about President Trump, who cares as well.
Yeah, it's one thing I think, Shakir, like Kathleen said, for people like Kathleen or yourself, for example, to think that. It's another thing for the Prime Minister to say it. I think particularly at this point in time where things are so tenuous with the U.S. government, where they, there's the negotiations that broke off have not yet restarted. And then you had this kind of deliberate leak yesterday that, now he's considering maybe going for a FIFA event to Washington. Like it was a strange kind of course of events. And interesting that it concluded today with, or semi-concluded with, the Prime Minister saying what he did. Why do you think he thought that it was merited?
I think it goes back to what you said earlier, the whole Ford thing. I do think Canadians, appreciate a politician that when they make a mistake, they openly kind of admit, they're at fault and kind of reverse course like Ford has done many times, and seeing Carney do it right now. I think the whole thing with Carney, though, is really the tone of how he said it, right? Just such a flippant dismissal of a question. And I think, we often talk about Pierre Poilievre and his tone, and we criticize him when he says things like this or does things that have an awkward tone. I think it's equally fair that we talk the same way about Mark Carney when he behaves this way. And I think particularly on the issue set, this is not a small issue, not just the fact that he hasn't produce any results on this particular issue, but this issue was central to him becoming the Prime Minister in the last election. And so to have such a dismissive nature, I think it does rub a lot of people the wrong way. But I would say, this does depend on the political side you follow. I think if you're a conservative or you're right-leaning, you obviously look at this, and it's another example of, an arrogant leader who's very dismissive and has yet to produce or make a deal, and again, something that was very central to him being the Prime Minister of this country. I think if you're a progressive or a liberal, as Kathleen has said, you're probably looking at this like it's about time we took away some of the limelight or some of the focus on Donald Trump and focus on moving past the U.S. So again, this depends on where you fall, but I think ultimately people do appreciate someone who can make a mistake, admit to that mistake, and then move forward.
I think also, Kathleen, like it does feel as though since those talks have stopped, like the country as a whole, even political discourse has focused largely on domestic stuff. Like, for example, what we're going to talk about in the next segment with the pipeline MOU, the budget, like it did sort of recede. And it's sort of ironic that it's this answer that the Prime Minister gave over the weekend that put it back in the headlines.
Yeah, and I think the caution, if the prime minister wanted to take some advice on Tuesday night, is that it did show as a bit of a tell on his kind of frustration at times with journalists in the press gallery. He has a bit of a short fuse when it comes to some questions. You remember some infamous comments, look into yourself, and others that it shows kind of demonstrates an intolerance for him to actually engage in that process, which is necessary for our democracy, which is the back and forth with journalists who are meant to hold the prime minister and other elected officials to count. So, and to take their questions seriously and thoughtfully as opposed to just brushing them off. That said, he turned around and in question period today was grilled on it multiple times. But I think having a bit of that like humble approach when you come to those scrums, whether they're international or they're domestic, is really going to be something that Carney and the team around him are going to have to prep him better for.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the time they're just like, the vibe is very Shakir, like, oh, why do I need to answer this kind of thing?
That's right.
And I've certainly experienced it with other politicians as well. But your point is well taken, Shakir, that like, if everyone's going to scrutinize Pierre Poilievre's tone, particularly to reporters, let's say, in certain cases, then it's only fair they do the same here.
Absolutely, and I think it just kind of shows, with fair respect to Carney, he's not like a career politician. He's coming into this, I think, with a different approach and a different set of skill sets. And I think, if you will, the real Mark Carney kind of comes out, and it might not be the most appealing character, right? And I think we've seen that on numerous accounts, but I think his team needs to do a better job of kind of making sure when he is in front of the camera or when he is engaging with media that, he is acting a certain way and honestly takes these questions very seriously, especially a question of of great importance like Canada, U.S., and our trade dynamics. So I think for Carney, more of a learning experience of how to kind of deal with these things, more of being more of a political actor, if you will, and not just thinking that, you're the chair of Brookfield and you can answer these things how you want to answer them and dismiss the media the way you want to dismiss them. You are the prime minister. You have to address questions in a certain way, and your tone and approach does matter when you deal with the media.